Hey everyone, welcome to this explainer on reproduction in organisms. Today we're exploring what is absolutely the ultimate biological imperative. We're talking about how life ensures its very own survival generation after generation. It's literally the one process without which no species could stick around for long. So let's just get right into it. Here's our roadmap for today. We'll start with number one, the continuity of life, and move straight into number two, the simple copy-paste mechanics of asexual reproduction. Then we'll dive into number three, the amazing genetic remix of sexual reproduction, and we'll break that down into three crucial phases. Phase one is pre-fertilization, phase two is the main event, and finally, phase three covers new beginnings. All right, section one, the continuity of life. Okay, so let's tackle the absolute biggest problem biology faces, mortality. Every single living thing grows older, a process called senescence, and ultimately dies, right? Whether they live for just a few weeks, like a butterfly, or for thousands of years, like a massive banyan tree, the individual always has a definitive lifespan. So, how does species actually survive forever? Well, the answer is reproduction. It's that vital link that ensures a species keeps going long after the older individuals are gone. Basically, every organism moves through three distinct stages. You start with the juvenile phase, or the vegetative phase if you're a plant, which is essentially just growing up, right until sexual maturity. Next up is the reproductive phase, where the organism actually creates offspring. And finally, the senescent phase, which marks the end of being able to reproduce and leads right into old age. But you might be wondering, what's actually directing this whole biological play? It doesn't just happen randomly. In both plants and animals, hormones act as the primary directors behind the scenes, interacting with the environment to trigger these massive biological shifts. Moving on to section two, copy and paste, asexual reproduction. To solve that whole mortality problem, biology basically came up with two distinct strategies. First, we have asexual reproduction. This is where a single parent creates an exact genetic and physical clone of itself. We're talking zero mixing of traits. It's incredibly fast, and it's highly efficient. On the flip side, we have sexual reproduction, which is much more of a team effort. It requires two parents of opposite sexes, fusing male and female gametes to create offspring that are entirely unique. Now, it definitely takes more energy, but it brings something really special to the table, which we'll get into in just a minute. So this whole copy-paste mechanism plays out brilliantly in simpler organisms, like yeast, through a process called budding. Basically, a tiny bud is produced. It just hangs out and remains attached to the parent cell while it grows, and then eventually, pop, it pinches off to become a completely new yet genetically identical organism. It's super simple, completely straightforward, and allows the population to multiply rapidly. But hey, it's not just single-celled organisms that can clone themselves. Plants can absolutely do this too, through a process called vegetative propagation. They use specific parts, called vegetative propagules, think potato tubers, ginger rhizomes, or agave bulbioles, to spread like wildfire. Actually, this mechanism is incredibly powerful. Take the water hyacinth, for example. It was originally introduced to India for its pretty flowers, but it propagates vegetatively at such a phenomenal rate that it literally earned the nickname the Terror of Bengal. It completely takes over water bodies, draining all the oxygen and killing off the fish. So yeah, biology's copy-paste is highly effective, sometimes a little too effective. Let's move to section three, the remix, sexual reproduction. Now you might be thinking, if asexual reproduction is so amazingly fast and efficient, why bother doing anything else? Well, what happens when a species suddenly needs to adapt to a changing, unfavorable environment? Instead of just making a simple copy, sexual reproduction acts like a massive genetic remix. Even simple organisms like algae and fungi that normally just clone themselves will actually switch over to sexual reproduction when conditions get really tough. Why? Because fusing genetic material from two different parents gives their offspring new genetic combinations, a real fighting chance. The resulting offspring aren't identical to each other, nor to their parents. This variation is literally a game changer for long-term survival. When we look at complex animals, specifically female placental mammals, getting ready for this genetic remix is strictly controlled by cyclic changes in the ovaries, accessory glands, and of course hormones. And there's a really fascinating split here. Primates, so monkeys, apes, and us humans, experience the menstrual cycle, where the broken endometrium is shed as blood. But non-primates like cows, dogs, and sheep undergo the oestrus cycle. They experience a short period of heat, and instead of bleeding, the broken lining is just efficiently reabsorbed by the body. Which brings us to Section 4, Phase 1, Pre-fertilization. To truly understand how this genetic remix actually happens across the biological world, we need to look at 3 sequential events, starting with the setup. The absolute crucial first step is gametogenesis. That's the formation of haploid gametes. Haploid just means these cells are carrying exactly half the usual number of chromosomes. In simpler organisms like certain algae, the male and female gametes look completely identical. Because you literally cannot tell them apart just by looking at them, we call them homogametes or isogametes. But as we move up the evolutionary ladder to higher organisms, things get highly specialized. We get heterogametes, morphologically distinct cells. You have the male gamete, which is typically the highly motile, fast-moving sperm, and the female gamete, the much larger, non-motile ovum or egg. The forms perfectly match their functions here. One is built for travel, and the other is built to harbor life. Once these gametes are formed, step 2 is the physical meetup. Gamete transfer is absolutely critical and, honestly, often perilous. In simple plants like algae or mosses, water is the medium that carries the male gametes. Because so many just get lost along the way, these organisms have to pump out massive numbers of male gametes just to compensate. In higher plants, though, this is solved by a much more targeted approach, pollination. Pollen grains carrying the male gametes are transferred from the anther to the stigma. They might stay on the same plant or hitch a ride via wind, insects, or animals to reach a completely different plant. All right, Section 5, Phase 2, the main event. So after the gametes are successfully transferred and are finally in the same place, we arrive at the absolute climax of the whole process, fertilization, which biologists also call syngamy. This is where the magic happens and the 2 gametes actually fuse, but where it happens makes a massive difference. External fertilization occurs outside the body, usually in water, like we see with fish and amphibians. It's incredibly vulnerable to predators. Internal fertilization, on the other hand, occurs safely tucked inside the female's body. The number of eggs produced is way lower because it's a far safer environment. This is the highly successful strategy used by birds, mammals, and higher plants. And speaking of higher plants, flowering plants, or angiosperms, throw an absolute curveball during fertilization. It's called double fertilization, and it is wild. When the pollen tube reaches the ovule, it doesn't just drop off one male gamete, it releases 2. One fuses with the egg to form your standard zygote, but the second one, it performs a triple fusion with 2 polar nuclei to create a triploid endosperm. Now, why go to all this extra trouble? Well, that endosperm acts kind of like a packed lunch. It provides all the essential nutrients to the developing embryo right inside the seed. Moving to Section 6, Phase 3. New beginnings. Okay, now that we have a successfully fertilized diploid zygote, embryogenesis kicks off. But how does the organism ensure the safe development of this brand new generation? In the animal kingdom, this generally plays out in 2 main ways. Oviparous animals, like reptiles and birds, lay fertilized eggs covered in hard protective shells. The development happens entirely outside the mother's body, completely exposed to the elements. Viviparous animals, however, like humans, dogs, and horses, develop the zygote safely inside the mother's body, only delivering the offspring when it's fully developed and ready to face the world. In flowering plants, the post-fertilization transformation is just spectacular. The sepals and petals wither and drop right off. The ovules inside the flower turn into seeds containing the embryo. And the ovary itself? It develops into a fruit, forming a protective thick wall called the pericarp. Think of an everyday pea pod for a second. The peas are the seeds, and they're safely housed within the protective pericarp of the pod itself. It's honestly a perfect biological packaging system. But as you probably know, biology loves an exception. Surprisingly, some of the most common fruits we eat aren't just swollen ovaries. Take the apple, for instance. It is technically classified as a false fruit. Why? Because the fleshy, sweet, edible part of the apple that we all love actually develops from the flower's thalamus, the base of the flower, rather than just the ovary alone. Nature's just full of these amazing workarounds. And here is another incredible exception, one that has massive implications for us. Parthenocarpy. This is the development of fruit without any fertilization occurring at all. And because there's no fertilization, there are absolutely no seeds. Interestingly, plant breeders can now artificially induce this using specific growth substances. This is exactly how we get those high-demand seedless watermelons and muskmelons on a massive scale. There's also a related, equally fascinating process called apomixis, where seeds do form without fertilization, essentially cloning and locking in hybrid characteristics perfectly. So what does this all mean? As we look to the future, understanding these deeply ingrained biological mechanisms opens up some pretty incredible possibilities. We've journeyed from the natural copy-pasting of asexual organisms all the way to the complex, diverse remix of sexual reproduction. But now that we are actually learning to manipulate these systems, like inducing fruit growth without fertilization, it leaves us with a totally fascinating question. As our global population continues to swell, could utilizing seedless fruits and apomictic seeds completely revolutionize the way we manage and grow the world's food supply? Think about it. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and keep questioning the world around you.